everyone, it's Kerry back with you today. Today I wanted to share a little technique with you that I was actually taught by Mum, aka the Motherlode, and it's a great little technique to make a bunch of these faux stamps in a really short amount of time, and you get that lovely perforated edge that gives them that bit more realistic feel. So this technique will allow you to make a bunch of these in a really short amount of time, but you will need to use your sewing machine. So what I've also got here is a grid that I have printed out. Now you can print this out for free on the internet. I'll leave a link in the description box below to where the website I went to create this grid, and you can actually create it in different sizes. So I have one here that's a bit larger, and I've just printed these out on regular copy paper, and then I've cut a little piece out. Now this one here is actually on slightly heavier weight copy paper, but these ones that I've created were just on regular copy paper, so it works just fine on either one. So I have taken my larger sheet of grid and I have just cut out a small section of the grid to work on, and I wanted to make sure that I had a block of 9 stamps. So this one was actually another row of stamps, and I've just cut it in the middle of the row of stamps because I need to have these lines for me to be able to get my perforations. So once I've cut out a piece of my grid paper, I'm actually going to turn it over, and I'm going to use some Distress Oxide ink today, and I'm just going to randomly add some colour onto the back of this paper, making sure that I'm covering where those 9 boxes were, so making sure I'm pretty much going right to the edge. There is no method for what's right and wrong with colouring. The stamps themselves are so tiny, so you're not even going to see any mistakes that you make if you're not happy with your colouring. But I'm just trying to make sure that I do have some colour pretty much everywhere on that card. And when I'm happy with the colouring, I'm just going to add some splashes of water. So this will give me more variation on my background. Just let that sit for a couple of seconds. And then I'll just dab some of that ink off. And you'll see I'm getting all these sort of lovely watermarks in my background there. And then I'll just dry this off thoroughly. So once my card is dried off and I've got a pretty background there, I'm going to take this piece of card over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to make sure that there is no thread in my sewing machine. So I'm just going to be sewing with the needle and no thread. And I'm going to sew on the back here where these grid lines are. You need to have your sewing machine set to a straight stitch, and you want the stitches to be very close together. So you can see all I have done is stitched down the line with my sewing machine on a straight stitch with no thread in my sewing machine, and that's basically just punched a whole load of little holes along the edge of that line. So you're going to do the same on all of the grid lines for these 9 squares, and then you'll do the same going across the other way as well, trying to keep as straight as you can on these lines. And once you've done that, you will end up with something that looks like this one. So this one I've already sewn down these lines, and I now have these perforation marks along the edges of my grid. So once I have my perforated stamp sheet, it's time to decorate them, and a really quick and easy way to decorate them is to use stamps. Now I've got a selection of stamps here, But as you'll notice, quite a few of these are much larger than my actual stamping area. So if I was to try and stamp this on here, it takes up a lot more room than just my one little stamp area. So I'm going to start at the top, on the top row of my stamps here, and I'm going to use a scrap piece of paper to mask off the areas that I don't want the stamp to come into contact with. So I have my line along here, which is the bottom edge of this row of stamps, and I'm just going to place this piece of paper just so that the edge of the paper goes a couple of millimeters above the perforation line of this row of stamps. Now I'm just going to take some black ink. The other thing that I need to be mindful of is the top line of my stamps. I want to make sure that my image stays within my stamp area. So I'm going to work backwards so I have less chance of smudging my images. Just making sure that I stay within the lines of the stamp. And then once I take the mask away, you can see that those stamped images have stayed within the confines of that little perforated stamp area. I've got a tiny little stamp here that says 25 cents. And I'm just going to add that onto the top of my stamp. Pussycat. So I'll just stamp the rest of these. So there we go. Now I have my little sheet full of stamps ready to use, and then to break them off your perforated sheet, I just fold them along the edge just to give that perforated line a little bit more of reinforcement. There we go, and then when you're ready to use them, you can just do the same thing, just give them a bit of a fold along the line just to help that tear nice and easily. There we go, one little perforated stamp ready to be used. Anyway, these are really fun to make, very addictive, and as you can see, you can make heaps of them really quite quickly. So I hope you found that helpful. I would love to see yours if you make any. And thanks so much for joining me today. See you next time. Bye.